In the past week, Matthew's life was busy and fulfilling. Planting trees during the day. At night, he would meditate and learn spells. He even found time to find someone to build this small house in the forest. The house was not big, but it was well equipped. In addition to the necessary functional areas, the two carpenters also built a small attic and a beautiful fence for him. Matthew sat on the wooden bed. There was a faint fragrance between his nose and mouth. He vaguely felt that the green energy in his natural legendary path had increased slightly. As for the progress of the undying path, it had halted. This might be related to the fact that he had not summoned many undead creatures or killed any recently. However, Matthew was most excited about the strengthening. There's no hurry. I've already endured for so many days. Let's wait for the sky to turn dark. Matthew looked out the window. The faint yellow sunlight was gradually dimming. Even though few people came to this forest, he still maintained the habit of summoning skeletons at night. It wasn't that Matthew was afraid of being disturbed. He simply didn't want to scare the ordinary people in the town. Half an hour later, Matthew walked out of the wooden house. The warm night wind brought the laughter of the oak trees. Matthew opened the cellar lid of the skeleton cellar and woke up the 12 skeleton soldiers one by one. Very quickly, the skeleton soldiers finished assembling. Under the hazy moonlight, Matthew carefully examined the skeletons. He wanted to choose the best one to strengthen. In fact, Matthew had wanted to strengthen Peggy at first. After all, she was at profession level 9, and the two of them had been together for many years, so they had a tacit understanding. However, the problem was that Peggy was a mutant skeleton and did not meet the requirements for this enhancement. Matthew had to pick the best one from this batch of skeleton soldiers with an average level of 3. After a 20-minute physical examination, Matthew finally chose the target to strengthen. It was a skeleton soldier that was looking at him in a daze. The reason why Matthew chose him was because he had considered many aspects. The soul fire of this skeleton soldier was more condensed. Although it did not have the most bones, its bones were relatively good. The most important thing was, Matthew realized that this fellow was a little different from the other skeleton soldiers. The other skeleton soldiers would only be in a daze when they were examined by him. But it was different. It had been unconsciously twisting its hips. It was this that aroused Matthew's curiosity. It said that very few undead creatures can inherit some of their abilities from when they were alive. This skeleton soldier might also have a chance to awaken. With this thought in mind, Matthew ordered it to stand out alone. In order to make it easier to order him around in the future, he even specially gave him a name. Since it's a skeleton soldier, let's call it Soldier from now on. Prompt: naming successful. Your summoned creature skeleton soldier number 11 has its own name, Soldier. Soldier was puzzled by your naming, but he was still grateful for it. Soldier twisted his crotch at you. It's about time. Matthew ordered the other skeletons to go back to the cellar. Then, he glanced at the summoning panel. Name: Soldier. Race: Skeleton, LV3. Attributes: Strength 14/Constitution 8/Agility 14/Intuition 4/Intelligence 4/Charm 4. Characteristics: Fear immunity, disease immunity, undead race. Ability: Step back. High agility and strength. Matthew raised his eyebrows. He tried to invest 10 strengthening points into Soldier. Enhancement successful. Soldier's level had increased to level 4, and his overall attributes had received a small increase. Soldier received the enhancement keyword Beginner Enlightenment. Beginner Enlightenment: White, your summoned creature has the intelligence of a 5-year-old child and can understand some of your simple commands. Strengthening can upgrade the summoned creature, increase its overall attributes, and impose keywords of different grades on them. Matthew was an experienced gamer. He could tell the general direction of the system at a glance. He strengthened Soldier again. Enhancement successful. Soldier received the keyword Short Weapon Specialization. Short Weapon Specialization: Purple, your summoned creature is good at using short weapons. When it uses a short weapon, its attack speed, attack power, and critical hit probability are increased by 30%. Sure. Matthew no longer hesitated and strengthened it with all his might. The next 3 attempts were all successful. The rewards were 2 good keywords and a level increase. Weakness Observation: Blue, your summoned creature can identify the enemy's weaknesses before and during battle. Assassin Mode: Blue, your summoned creature has activated the Assassin Mode. Agility +2, and learn the Assassin's ability Stealth and Sap. I didn't expect you to become an assassin with some twitches of your hips. Matthew looked at Soldier with interest. He wondered if it was the effect of beginner's enlightenment. He noticed that Soldier's soul fire had become more solid. There was also a hint of nostalgia and respect in the eyes that looked at him. Hence, Matthew struck while the iron was hot and continued to strengthen it. Enhancement failed. Soldier received the keyword bone loss. Bone loss, gray, your summoned creature's HP is reduced by 10%. Would a failed enhancement result in negative keywords? Matthew was deep in thought. This was not unusual. The results of the next 2 times were normal. 1 upgrade and a purple keyword. Dirty trick, purple prerequisite keyword, weakness observation, your summoned creature is good at using underhanded moves including but not limited to crotch attack, sand toss, and return spear. Dirty trick is actually purple grade. Matthew was a little surprised. Soldier looked at him innocently. With its current intelligence, it might not be able to understand the changes in its body, but these keywords would be integrated into its combat instincts. Matthew clicked his tongue in wonder. He walked around Soldier. He noticed that the color of the latter's bones had changed significantly. The gray bones that had occupied most of his body had disappeared, replaced by white and even silver bones. Gray bone, white bone, silver bone, gold, diamond. The classification of skeletons flashed through Matthew's mind. Soldier was now a skeleton assassin. Of course, it couldn't be compared to a golden skeleton with extraordinary talent like Peggy. However, it was not to be underestimated. Enhancement successful. Soldier obtained the legendary keyword Sword Dancer. Sword Dancer, gold. Your summoned creature has awakened part of its strength from when it was alive. Assassin mode has been replaced with the rare profession Blade Dancer mode. Soldier gained new abilities, Blade Dance, Funeral Dance, and Dark Night Cloak. A golden legendary keyword. Matthew's eyes immediately lit up. After this enhancement, Soldier's temperament had obviously changed. The bones on his body flickered with a silver light, and almost in an instant all of them turned silver white. A pitch-black curtain appeared behind him. Matthew's heart skipped a beat as he ordered, "Put it on." Soldier was stunned for a moment. The curtain automatically covered his body. In the next second, Soldier disappeared without a trace. Your summoned soldier has used Dark Night Cloak. Matthew closed his eyes and activated his blind sense. He could sense that there was an invisible unit near him, but he could not know its exact location. He was clearly right in front of me. Matthew asked Soldier to turn off the Dark Night Cloak. The invisibility effect of this ability was too shocking. After all, Filey's blind sense was supposed to be the nemesis of invisible units. It seems that I have to be careful in the future. Not all invisible units can be detected by blind sense. But now, the more Matthew looked at Soldier, the more satisfied he was. In time, this guy's strength would definitely not be inferior to Peggy's, and it might even surpass the Bone Dragon. I wonder if there are any higher level gold legendary keywords. Matthew subconsciously wanted to strengthen it again. However, he suddenly realized that he had used up all the strengthening opportunities. He smiled bitterly and patted his cheek. Now, he finally understood why the mobile gacha game was so popular in his previous life. Since the Dark Night Cloak wouldn't consume any of Soldier's energy at night, Matthew arranged for him to patrol outside his house in stealth mode. The cabin had just been built, and Matthew still had a lot of arrangements to make. If it were the old Rolling Stone town, it would be fine. Recently, public security had shown signs of deterioration, so he had to be extra careful. Spell traps were a must. When I go to the market to buy seeds tomorrow, I'll also see if there are any trap-setting scrolls. It's too troublesome to do it myself. Matthew lay on the hard wooden bed and ate a few mouthfuls of bread. He began to miss Peggy's cooking. Why don't I have Soldier guard the next and ask Peggy to come over and accompany me? No, Soldier's intelligence is still too low. He couldn't handle many things as easily as Peggy. Matthew yawned. He forced himself to meditate. For the soul crystals. He could not slack off for a night. Southwest of the oak forest. On the hill. 2 figures, one tall and one short, walked over. Boss Dean, it should be nearby. The farm below has been burned to ruins. It must be Heist doing. The tall man's face was fierce. This guy is really rude. He clearly promised boss that he would meet you on time. In the end, he ran to such a remote place without saying a word. We can't even find a trace of him. Short Dean stared at the trees ahead. Suddenly, his nose twitched. Heist is dead. The tall man was stunned. How is that possible? Could it be that the great mage had made a move? Dean's face was gloomy. Impossible. It's a fact that Ronin is trapped in the astral plane. He can't possibly lay his hands on a small fry like Heis. The tall man thought for a moment and said, "Is that a local lord? The Suki family was once glorious. Although the current patriarch is a useless guy, I heard that his wife ran away with a necromancer." Dean shook his head slightly. The two of them silently stepped into the oak forest. Heis' corpse is buried here. Dean looked gloomy. Buried in the woods. Who would do such a wicked thing? The tall man looked around. At this moment, he suddenly pointed into the distance and said, "Boss, look. There's a small wooden house over there. Craftsman Protection Association. Boss, look. There's a small house over there." As he spoke, he was about to walk over. "Don't go over there, Mobley." Dean suddenly shouted at the tall man to stop his rash action. "Follow me immediately," Dean said as he quickly retreated out of the forest. Mobley didn't understand, but he still followed Dean obediently. They continued until they completely left the forest. Mobley couldn't help but ask, "Why should we retreat? If it were up to me, we should set fire to this place. I can feel that this place is full of vitality. If this fire is strong enough, we might be able to advance a lot on the path of legend." Dean was also moved. But very quickly, he shook his head. "I've told you and the others in the Brotherhood many times. The most important quality of an arsonist is restraint. It is easy to surrender to the burning desire, but we need to restrain it. Look closely at this forest. It's obviously newly cultivated. And that hut. I just sensed the scent of a domain in the forest. This meant that there was at least a powerful druid nearby, and Heis was probably killed by him. Before I know his level, I don't want to fight a high-level druid in his domain." Mobley scratched the back of his head and said disapprovingly, "But I've never heard of any powerful druids in Rolling Stone Town." Dean looked at him. "The intelligence needs to be updated. We'll stay outside tonight and enter the city tomorrow to collect intelligence. After making sufficient preparations, we'll formulate a plan and then take action. Do you understand?" Mobley said resentfully, all right. You're the boss. I'll listen to you." The two of them went around the oak forest. They gradually disappeared into the night. At the edge of the forest, Matthew's figure quietly appeared. On his shoulder, an oak tree fairy was chattering about something. These two people are not good people. It was very likely that they were Heis accomplices, members of the Silver Frost Brotherhood. Matthew glanced at the mission panel. The progress of the maintenance mission was not updated. However, he did not let his guard down. In his opinion, the system was not omnipotent. Perhaps only after he had collected enough information would the mission progress be updated. In comparison, he was more willing to trust his intuition. "Did you remember what those two looked like?" Matthew asked the fairy on his shoulder. The latter revealed a smug expression, then rubbed Matthew's earlobe hard, revealing an extremely enjoyable expression. The next day, Security Bureau. Pa. Two lifelike portraits were placed on Blake's desk. Blake was still eating breakfast. When he saw Matthew, he wiped the breadcrumbs off his beard and hurriedly asked, "Is there something wrong with these two?" Matthew nodded. "They might be related to the farm fire." Blake stared at the portrait. "I understand. I'll mobilize people to follow them secretly. If there's really something wrong with them, I'll take them down. But today is the first day of the spring festival market. There are many people in the town, so I have to prioritize the safety of the people." Matthew expressed his understanding. He was not worried that Blake would not be a match for the two of them. The captain of the garrison team was already a peak Tier 3 warrior at a young age. It would not be difficult for him to fight Heis alone. Moreover, he had many members with excellent weapons and complete equipment. It was common knowledge that if no magic professions were involved, in a situation where warriors were fighting each other, it would always be an irrefutable fact that the party with more people and better equipment would win. Although Rolling Stone Town was a poor and remote place, it never lacked elite warriors. After all, the Suki family lord was a level 4 warrior himself. The only thing lacking here was spellcasters. "These two paintings are not bad. Can you introduce the artist to me?" Blake said as he looked at the two portraits. Matthew couldn't help but tease. Oak fairies are probably the most picky creatures in the world when it comes to appearance, and their princess has the strictest eye. They prefer handsome young men. As for you, Blake, you look at least 40 years old. Unless you shave your beard, they might not even want to see you. Blake was instantly displeased. "Hey, don't talk nonsense, okay? When I went out this morning, my mother even praised me for being very energetic. And what's wrong with my beard? Don't you think it makes me look manly? As for my age, I'm only 24 years old this year. The same age as you, Matthew. Matthew shrugged. Say hello to Ms. Liz for me. He then left the security office. Trade area. Farm Produce Street. Today was the opening day of the Spring Festival Market. The residents of the farms and villages around Rolling Stone Town had gathered here. The streets were crowded with people. Matthew squeezed through an ox cart full of white radishes and lettuce leaves. He arrived at a corner of the market. Under the shack, a young man with long hair was glancing at the waists of the people passing by with flickering eyes. Jeff. Stop looking. No one can save you if you steal again. Matthew slapped him on the shoulder. Jeff was shocked. Matthew, is that you? I don't intend to steal anything. I'm just looking. He explained. Seeing that Matthew did not have the intention to argue with him, he heaved a sigh of relief. It's still an oak seed, isn't it? That's right, growth green liquid is out of stock. The druid from before is missing, and I haven't found a new source of stock for it. Jeff was a traveling merchant. He wandered between Rolling Stone Town and Guardian Highland, selling the specialties of both places for a living. The price of his goods was fair, but his hands and feet were not clean. He was caught stealing several times. The last time he was arrested, he should have been sentenced. It was Matthew who found Blake to help him. At that time, Jeff was so grateful that he expressed that he would never steal again. However, Matthew did not trust him. If it were not for the fact that there were very few merchants coming and going to the Guardian Highlands, and the oak seeds he needed were only available to the druids there, he would not have interceded for him. As usual, he picked up 2 small bags of seeds. Matthew flipped through it and frowned. The quality of these seeds isn't very good. Is that so? No way. Jeff was a little nervous. I told them that I wanted the best seed. The fat man told me that this was from the Druid Church and that the quality was definitely excellent. Damn it, I knew that humans' words couldn't be trusted. Matthew shook his head. He had already stepped into the oak tree domain, so he could naturally sense it clearly. These seeds were full of vitality on the surface. However, its interior seemed to have been violently destroyed by a force. Less than 1/10 of the seedlings would sprout. The quality of the seeds was on a completely different level from the ones Jeff had provided previously. You bought it from a human merchant in the Guardian Highlands? Matthew pondered. Yes, I just told you. The druid from before is missing. There seems to be some trouble in the forest over there. Matthew, don't tell me you don't want this batch of goods. Then I might really have to go back to my old job, Jeff said with a long face. Matthew glanced at him rudely. Suit yourself, but no one will care about you if you get caught next time. Even so, Matthew still accepted the goods at a price 20% lower than the market price. After all, no one in Rolling Stone Town would buy oak seeds except him. This was the first time that Jeff had made a mistake. The next time you go to buy seeds, you must find the local druids. The humans there are no different from us. It's too common to pass off inferior ones as good ones. Matthew warned after the deal was over. I understand. Unfortunately, I can't tell the quality of the seeds. But there's news about the book called Germination, Jeff said regretfully. If you need it, I'll buy that spellbook directly next time. Matthew nodded. The druid's germination spell could speed up the sprouting of seeds. Mastering this spell would greatly increase the efficiency of planting trees. After all, the steps of planting trees were closely linked. If one segment were affected, the overall efficiency would drop. Oh, right. Matthew was about to leave, but he suddenly remembered Jeff's dark history, so he asked, do you know how to pick locks? Yes, but I haven't done it for a long time, Jeff replied. Can you open this lock? Matthew handed over the psalm. Jeff took the spellbook, knocked on the steel lock, listened for a while, and then shook his head. I'm afraid not. This is a compound lock. I definitely can't open it with my skills. But I can find an axe to help you split it. Axe? What a joke. In that case, the spells recorded in the book would most likely be destroyed. No thanks. Matthew calmly put away the spellbook. Jeff looked at the silver book reluctantly. Why don't you try the Craftsman Protection Association? They also have locksmiths there. Craftsman Protection Association. Matthew knew that there was such an existence in Rolling Stone Town, but he was not familiar with it. His wooden house was built by someone recommended by Blake, so he did not put too much effort into it. Yes, an organization led by Mr. Richard. It is said to protect the legitimate rights and interests of craftsmen. Many carpenters, stonemasons, and workshop workers are members of the association. Mr. Richard is a real gentleman, isn't he? Jeff said admiringly. He was one of the few members of the Committee of Five who was willing to do practical things, and the craftsmen loved him. The association building is north of the craftsman area. You should know the way, right? He thanked Jeff for his suggestion. Matthew struggled through a pile of tomatoes, spinach, and pig manure. In the market, there seemed to be more and more people. The Craftsman Protection Association's building was deserted, forming a sharp contrast with the trade area. Matthew followed the receptionist to the locksmith's office on the second floor. The door was open. Dong dong dong. He knocked on the door and looked inside. There was only a man in his 30s in the office. The man was dressed like a gentleman, sitting upright and reading a thick book. Mr. Richard. Matthew was a little surprised. I thought this was where the locksmiths gathered. Richard put down the book and joked, so is it not Mr. Matthew? The man who is only one step away from becoming an outstanding citizen. Please come in. You're right. This is indeed the locksmith's room, but they're all at the trade area now. It's the spring festival, you know? Matthew nodded slightly. He was about to leave. Do you need someone to unlock something? Richard suddenly asked. Matthew nodded. What kind of lock is it? Household or? Richard asked hesitantly. Matthew simply took out the defensive psalm. The compound lock of a magic book. Richard's eyes were very vicious. Did you accidentally lose the key? Matthew said frankly, it's not that complicated. It's just that I'm its new owner. Richard nodded thoughtfully. Then, he maintained this position for a long time. Matthew was a little puzzled. After a long time. Then, he stammered. Bring it over. I'll help you open it. Matthew handed the book over without hesitation. Richard had a good reputation in the town, so he wasn't worried that Richard would steal his spellbook. However, the other party's behavior was indeed a little strange. Could it be that he's an amateur in the art of lockpicking, but he's not skilled enough and is afraid that I'll blame him if he breaks it? Matthew thought. Richard's fingertips had just touched the steel lock of the defensive psalm. However, he heard a paw sound. The lock actually opened automatically. In the office. It was quiet. What? Your lock was originally unlocked. You sure are careless, Mr. Matthew. Richard said with a smile. Matthew stared at him silently. Half a minute later. Maybe it was just luck. It seems to have opened by itself. A trace of regret flashed in Richard's eyes. Matthew was still organizing his reply when Richard said, Then, I suppose I'm your lucky charm. How about you treat me to a drink at Green Fine Bar? All right. Matthew replied. Then, he glanced at the system notification. Observation, Richard has used Omnipotent Hands to open the defensive psalm for you. Remark, Omnipotent Hands, Tier 5 Thief ability. Able to unlock 95% of physical locks and 60% of magic locks below Tier 5. Hidden talent. Omnipotent Hands, Tier 5 ability. Matthew's eyelids twitched. This meant that the elegant gentleman in front of him had at least level 17 in his profession. Furthermore, it was the rogue profession that was extremely difficult to master. No wonder he could appear behind him without warning the last time they met. At that time, Matthew thought it was that Bina's confession had distracted him. What's wrong? When he walked out of the association building, Richard seemed to notice Matthew's absent-minded expression. Matthew shook his head. He looked at the celebratory crowd that was squeezing in from the neighboring district. In the crowd, there was a young man dressed exaggeratedly, walking on stills. He kept swaying left and right, greeting the pedestrians on both sides. His movements were extremely clumsy, as if he could fall at any moment. Nothing, I'm just a little emotional. Rolling Stone Town is really full of hidden talents. Matthew said as he looked at the young man who was standing on his legs. Isn't that so? Richard smiled and made way for the two playing children. Then, he turned around and glanced at Matthew. After all, a bone dragon is not something an ordinary person can control. Green Fine Bar. In a booth near the corner of the back door. The young bartender happily served the drinks. Hello, 2 cups of pig-eating wine. Today is the spring festival. Old Barry will give everyone a cup of sparkling sweet water for free. Richard elegantly took a sip of the light green wine. Then, he said to Matthew, I still remember the first time I came here. I didn't know what a wonderful alcoholic drink, pig-eating wine, was. When old Bill recommended it to me, I thought he was teasing a foreigner like me. Matthew also raised his wooden cup and took a sip. This was a specialty of Rolling Stone Town. The origin of its name was unknown, but the taste was spicy and memorable. This was because a type of seasonal weed was needed to make pig wine. Therefore, it could only be tasted around the spring festival every year. Matthew did not reply to Richard. He was still thinking about Richard's intentions. It was fully by chance that I went to the Craftsman Protection Association to find a thief, so Richard couldn't have predicted that. So, was this just a coincidence? Or did he plan to get in touch with me, so he just took advantage of the situation? No matter what the situation was, it was not a good thing to be targeted by a Tier 5 bandit. Fortunately, Richard did not show any hostility. Matthew also believed that he was doing the right thing. There should be nothing to be afraid of. The two of them chatted for a while. Perhaps a portion of the people from the market and the celebration had scattered over. The tavern gradually became lively. Richard suddenly asked Matthew with interest, "That girl, did she write to you after she went to Jade Court?" Bina. The tense Matthew instantly recalled the girl who confessed to him at his door that day. No. Matthew shook his head. He thought for a moment and added, "It has only been half a month. She might have just arrived at Jade Court and hasn't settled down yet." Richard smiled. "You don't have to defend her. I'm just curious about your attitude toward her. As far as I know, you're very popular with female students, but why do I feel that you don't like them very much?" Matthew denied, "No, the girls are all very energetic and cute." Richard asked curiously, "Then why do you always reject their confessions?" "I heard Bina wasn't the first." Matthew explained seriously, "Just like I told Bina, they don't know the real me. They are still a group of children. They might like me because my identity as a teacher gives me the opportunity to gain their admiration easily. It could also be because having an older boyfriend would make her feel vain among her peers. It might even be because the taboo relationship between teachers and students had stimulated their rebellious hearts. In short, there could be many factors behind their confessions. However, it could not be because of love. And I've always treated them equally. They were my students, a group of innocent children who were still growing up. That was all." Richard suddenly asked, "Including Sif?" Matthew answered without hesitation, "Including Sif." "All right, chatting with you is really boring." Richard looked helpless. "Hey, Matthew, your popularity with the girls would be something to brag about. If it were anyone else, they would have told the whole town. But you're actually seriously explaining to me why you didn't accept those girls' confessions." Matthew said seriously, "I thought this was something very serious that I needed to clarify. Of course, it's important. At least our Lord should be able to sleep well tonight. I'll pass on your words to Rugger." Richard yawned. Matthew was suddenly enlightened. "So you're the Lord's?" Richard shook its head. "No, it was just a coincidence. Your spellbook reminded me of some of my experiences when I was young, and then I couldn't help myself. Of course, Rugger has also talked to me about it, but I have already retired for many years. I am not interested in you or your bone dragon. Today is the spring festival. Let's have another drink. It's on me." Richard seemed to have lost the mood to talk. But this time, Matthew took the initiative to say, "So that night, when Sif was kidnapped, you would have solved the problem even if I didn't do anything." Richard spread his hands. "Don't think that I'm so powerful, Matthew. I'm just a retired old man. The person who attacked us was an evil priest. Of course, he wouldn't be my match in a one-on-one fight, but I didn't know any spells. I couldn't find their location through magic like Zeller, nor could I rush to the scene of the incident as quickly as you could to save the damsel in distress. Do you understand? So I want to thank you on behalf of Sif. After all, this world belonged to wizards." When he said the last sentence, his tone was a little lonely and his eyes were filled with memories. Matthew nodded thoughtfully. After a while, the busy bartender hurriedly served 2 more glasses of pig-eating wine. Richard was about to take the cup. Suddenly, his body movement stopped there, but his eyes glanced at the door. Matthew followed his gaze. 2 seconds later, the door of the tavern was pushed open. 2 figures, one tall and one short, walked in side by side. Matthew's pupils contracted. Even though the other party's face had been modified, he recognized that this was the duo who had passed through the oak forest last night. The 2 of them entered the tavern and looked around. "Can't they see us?" Matthew was surprised to find that the short man with a vigilant expression quickly shifted his gaze away from the corner booth. It was as if there was no one sitting in the booth. A moment later, the short man found a convenient spot to observe and sat down. The tall man started to get close to the bartender. Those are two gang members from two big cities. They are inquiring about a high-level druid who doesn't exist. Richard calmly grabbed the glass and took a sip. Looking for you. Matthew said frankly, yes, on the night I saved Sif, I killed an arsonist. Arsonist. Strange. Richard narrowed his eyes. These maggots that live in the sewers of the city actually left their territory. Matthew said, they might have been bewitched by the Order of Calamity. Richard thought for a moment. The Order of Calamity. Never heard of it. Matthew shrugged. Could it be an evil organization that has emerged in recent years? Other than that, I know that they seem to be members of the Silver Frost Brotherhood. Richard nodded and said, I know about that. The Silver Frost Brotherhood is a criminal organization active in Eastern countries. They have mastered the arsonist profession, and among the higher-ups of the organization, there is even a notorious, legendary profession called Red Letter Hunter. Matthew's heart skipped a beat. Is this organization very famous? Richard answered, it's a little notorious. Most of the members of this organization are wanted in major cities, including Jilu City, Bayan City, Guardian Highland, and Jade Court. Jade Court, in particular, placed a high bounty on the members of the Silver Frost Brotherhood because of a murder that targeted a wood elf village many years ago. Matthew suggested, I'm sure our Lord would want to capture these hooligans from Silver Frost Brotherhood. It's the spring festival today. Letting them come and go freely in the crowd will probably pose a hidden danger to public security. Do you want to take action? He knew that it was unlikely. However, he also wanted to see the actual combat situation of a high-level bandit. As expected, Richard shook his head and said, I'm retired. I'm only a civilian now. Moreover, the people who will deal with them are on their way. About 30 seconds later, a row of fully armed guards filed in from the gate. The leader was Blake, who was holding a short sword. Let's go. As soon as the soldiers entered the door, the short dean jumped up from the stool. Bang bang bang. With a few crisp sounds before the customers in the hall could react, thick black smoke and raging flames rushed out from several corners. The hall was in chaos. Through the back door, Dean grabbed Mobley, who was slow to react. The two pushed away the panicked customers and quickly crossed the hall to the back door. Dean breathed a sigh of relief. He did not know how the garrison team discovered them, but he knew very well that he must not get entangled with these fully armed soldiers in a narrow space. Even if he stabbed the other party with all of his might, he probably wouldn't be able to cause any dents in the other party's armor. However, as long as they left the tavern and entered the complex neighborhood, they would enter their home ground. Arsonists were never afraid of chaotic street battles, even if they were outnumbered. Moreover, it was the spring festival today. As long as they went out of the back door, they would have an endless stream of people as cover and countless invisible hostages. The two of them arrived at the back door under the cover of the thick smoke. Dean looked back. Very good. The hall was in chaos. Even the garrison member at the front was more than 10 steps away from him. This distance is perfect. Dean looked fierce. He took out 2 bottles of orange-red potion from his inventory and prepared to smash them. But at this moment, he suddenly felt his feet slip, and his entire body suddenly spun and fell forward. He instinctively wanted to throw away the 2 bottles of explosive potion. However, just as he was leaning forward, the 2 bottles of medicine had disappeared without a trace. What's the situation? Dean fell forward to the floor in shock and fury. Bang. Bang. He heard 2 heavy objects hitting the floor. Before he could react to what had happened, a strong garrison soldier had already used his knee to press down on his spine. He suddenly felt like he couldn't breathe. Clang. Another team member skillfully put heavy shackles on the 2 people who had fallen to the ground. Gentlemen, Rolling Stone Town does not welcome any members of the Silver Frost Brotherhood, but our prison welcomes you. Blake said righteously. Only then did he notice the 2 people in the booth next to him. Hey, Mr. Richard and Matthew, was it you? Oh, I understand. I was wondering why the 2 of them suddenly collapsed. Blake was enlightened. Then, he winked at Matthew with an expression that said, Don't worry, I'll keep it a secret for you. Matthew quickly explained, It wasn't me. However, his words were mercilessly interrupted by Richard. That's right. He did it. Good job, Matthew. I didn't know you had such skills. As he spoke, he raised his glass. To spring, I hope that the weather will be good this year and that everything will be peaceful. Then, he stood up and walked away with his gentleman's cane. When he passed by the two arsonists, Richard deliberately stopped. He smiled at the confused duo who had fallen to the ground and said, "Welcome to Rolling Stone Town." Matthew looked at this and was speechless. Observation: Richard used Stumbling Block to take down the arsonists Dean and Mobley successfully. Stumbling Block, Tier 5 Thief ability. Able to take down any target and temporarily seal all their abilities. Hint: you have obtained 2 explosive potions. Matthew lowered his head in shock. At this moment, only then did he realize that there were 2 bottles of orange-red potion in the right pocket of his shirt. A high-level thief is so terrifying. Matthew was shocked. Because today was the spring festival. Matthew deliberately stayed at his home in town for dinner. Putting aside her tall and fierce skeleton appearance, Peggy actually had the soul of a good wife and mother. For dinner, there was garlic roasted red sausage, honey roasted chicken, croissants, salad with kale and strawberries, mushroom fried noodles, spinach egg soup, and special snacks from the spring festival. Matthew was very satisfied. After dinner, he meditated in the basement for a while. It was not until late at night that he packed his things and rushed out of town. He had planned to spend the night at home. However, tonight was coincidentally a full moon night. Matthew decided to try the Moonlight Society's admission ticket he possessed. Midnight. Following the guidance of the moonlight, he came to the center of the oak forest and began to call the fairy princess name softly. Even if he had an entrance ticket, he would need the help of a nature soul to enter that strange space that only druids could enter. Coincidentally, Lulu, the leader of the oak tree fairies, was a nature soul. Extraordinary charm. Lulu was an overly shy fairy. The other fairies living in this oak forest had more or less greeted Matthew. Only this princess was always secretive. Even when she appeared in front of Matthew, she would hide among the berries so that he could not see her clearly. It would be a lie to say that he was not curious about Lulu. However, Matthew had always respected these little creatures who got along well with him. After summoning the fairy princess, Matthew closed his eyes. A cool breeze brushed past his face. There was a moment. Matthew vaguely felt that a fairy had stopped on his nose and was boldly walking up and down. This feeling quickly disappeared. Matthew thought that it was his imagination. He did not think that it was the fairy princess teasing him. After all, she was too shy. "I am here." A thin and weak voice drifted over from afar. Matthew could sense that she had stopped on a tree 5 steps away from him. "Good evening. I need your help. I have an entrance ticket to the Moonlight Society. Only with the help of a nature soul can I enter the corresponding interdimensional space." Matthew waved the ticket in his hand. "This is not a difficult matter." Lulu's voice drifted closer. "Why are you closing your eyes, Matthew?" Matthew smiled lightly and said, "If you allow me to open them, I will." I trust you, Matthew." Lulu's voice was hesitant at first. But soon, she mustered up her courage and said, "You can open your eyes now." Matthew opened his eyes naturally. At first, it was a faint glow under the moonlight. Then, he saw a pair of golden wings. Finally, there was a fairy that was slightly larger than ordinary fairies and that inconceivably exquisite face. At that moment, Matthew felt his head buzzing. His eyes widened subconsciously. Whoosh. Lulu flew back 20 feet nervously. Then, she hesitantly inched closer to Matthew. Pooh. Matthew let out a long breath and woke up from his loss of composure. "I'm sorry. I didn't expect you to be so beautiful." He laughed at himself and said, "Did my eyes pop out just now?" Lulu patted her fair chest with her small hand. "You did well, but that gaze just now did scare me." Matthew nodded. He finally understood why Lulu didn't easily appear in front of others. Perhaps it was not because she was shy. It was because of her unmatched beauty. "What is your charm?" Matthew asked. 20 points. Or perhaps more. "I don't know either." Lulu counted with her fingers. 20 points meant extraordinary charm. This was the limit of charm that ordinary creatures could reach. That was not counting the charm bonus unique to fairies. Almost all creatures would be tempted to get close to Lulu, grab her, or even toy with her. Even Matthew could not help but have evil thoughts when he stared at those small wings for a long time. You resisted the enchantment of the fairy princess, passive, willpower +1. Then can we start? Matthew tried hard to look away and asked. Of course. Lulu circled Matthew excitedly. This is the first time I've come into such close contact with a creature other than my clansmen. This feeling is so exciting. Right, you were talking about the Moonlight Society. No problem. Come with me, Matthew. As she spoke, her shadow danced in the moonlight. Matthew strolled along. After a while, the admission ticket in his hand suddenly disappeared. The singing of nature's soul awakened the young oak forest. Matthew felt as if there were friendly gazes on him. Lulu stopped on the trunk of a tall oak tree. Matthew walked closer to take a look. There was a pale green secret door on the tree wall. He pushed the door open and entered. The majestic greenery greeted them. Hint, you have entered the kingdom of the goddess of moon, Asiya, the half-domain moonlight woodland. This was the home of the spirits of nature. They hated evil and rejected outsiders. They were willing to maintain a friendly relationship with the druids. This is also the shelter of the moonlight's blessed. Every traveler who walks under the moonlight can pray to Asiya. If they receive a response, they can temporarily stay here to avoid the monsters hidden in the long night. The air was good. This was Matthew's first impression of moonlight woodland. He looked around. He found himself in an open space that was similar to the oak forest in the real world. Not far away, there was an altar of the goddess of the moon. A proud owl rested on the stone tablet of the altar. The other party's gaze was not very friendly. Matthew felt a little strange. According to the instructions on the admission ticket, even if he was a necromancer, there should be many nature souls and spiritual creatures nearby. He should be able to gain the recognition of the locals through various performances. Only then could he become a member of the Moonlight Society and obtain some additional blessings. Did something change? Matthew tried to ask about it. However, before he could get close to the altar, a rude voice was heard. Evil necromancer, if I were you, I would turn around and leave without hesitation. People should at least have a sense of shame. I don't know how you got the ticket or how you coerced a kind nature soul to hold a ritual for you, but if you think that you can become a moonlight's blessed just like that, then you are gravely mistaken. It was that owl. Its voice was like a little girl's voice. Matthew explained, I am indeed a necromancer, but I am not a bad person. The owl flapped its wings, and its voice became sharper. Bad people never say they are bad people. Get out of here, necromancer. I hate you. Matthew frowned. He had expected that the old-fashioned and conservative nature soul would have a bad attitude toward him because of his profession. However, he didn't expect that the owl wouldn't even give him a chance to explain. Miss Owl. He held his breath and patiently tried to persuade the other party. I think I've done things fairly and honestly. Wouldn't it be unfair if I were to be rejected just because of my profession? The owl flew up with a plop. Don't call me Miss Owl. I have a name. My name is Ella. Ella wouldn't trust a necromancer. Please leave immediately. As she spoke, she flew to Matthew's head, pretending to pounce on him. All right then. Matthew shrugged helplessly. Fortunately, he was already mentally prepared. The natives of the Moonlight Woodland were different from the newly ascended nature souls like Lulu. Although they still looked like small animals, they might have lived there for hundreds or thousands of years. The passage of time had made their thinking more stubborn. It would be euphemistic to describe them as inflexible. Not being able to join the Moonlight Society was not a big deal. It was just a spell sect. Matthew was about to leave. However, at this moment, a thin white light suddenly lit up on the altar. Hey, what are you looking at? The owl Ella bared her fangs and shouted, this is the grace of the goddess of moon, not something a necromancer like you can covet. Matthew shrugged. He didn't like the owl, but he couldn't be bothered to argue with her. Hence, he turned around and left. I dare you to take another look. If you anger the goddess of moon, I'm afraid she will punish you with lightning punishment, said Ella haughtily. Matthew ignored her and stepped into the secret door. However, at that moment, he heard thunder behind him. Rumble. Matthew was shocked. The goddess of moonlight couldn't be really that angry, right? He subconsciously turned around and saw a bolt of lightning fly out from the altar and strike the owl, Ella. In the next second, he appeared safe and sound in the oak forest. Lulu was nowhere to be seen. Did the goddess of moonlight's lightning strike the wrong target? Forget it, just treat it as a small interlude. Matthew adjusted his mood. He returned to the cottage and began his homework for the night. Outside the wooden house, Soldier was wearing a cloak of darkness, silently carrying out his patrol mission. The forest was quiet and peaceful. The night was silent. At daybreak, Matthew yawned and pushed open the wooden door. However, he was shocked to find a strange bird with black wings and cramped limbs resting on the oak tree 30 meters away from the door of the wooden house. Good morning, Mr. Matthew. The strange bird greeted him uneasily. Matthew looked at her in hesitation. If it weren't for the fact that the voice hadn't changed, he wouldn't have been able to associate the strange, charred bird with the arrogant owl from last night. Ella. He sized up the other party with interest. I'm sorry, Mr. Matthew. I only wanted to joke with you last night, but I didn't expect it to go too far. To show my sincerity, I will personally invite you to the Moonlight Forest tonight. If nothing goes wrong, you will successfully join the Moonlight Society and become a member of our harmonious and loving family. Matthew chuckled. He ignored Ella and went in to look for the sapling bag and tools. Then, he walked towards the pit he had chosen 2 days ago. Mr. Matthew, Mr. Matthew. Ella hurriedly followed him up. I'm busy, Miss Owl. Matthew waved the shovel and said, I didn't think you were joking yesterday, and I didn't feel the sincerity of your apology today, so I don't think I should join the Moonlight Society. He started digging. The flying mud scared Ella so much that she screamed and flew away. But not long after, she flew back eagerly. I apologize to you, Mr. Matthew. I know I was wrong. It was my ignorance that blocked my vision. I thought that necromancers were all bad people, but that's clearly not the case. Are you planting trees? Wow, what a great feat. You are the kindest necromancer I have ever seen. Mr. Matthew, it was all my fault last night. I thought you were a necromancer who had mastered the nature domain, and I felt disgusted. However, I thought it through later. I believe you are actually a druid who has mastered the domain of necromancy. Isn't that much more pleasing? I can feel the natural affinity from you. How refreshing. Wow, Mr. Matthew, are you even so handsome when you wipe your sweat? Ella tried to please Matthew. Matthew did not speak. He was just minding his own business. He worked from morning to dusk. In the evening, Matthew returned to the wooden house. A strange fluctuation surged in his heart. Your ability nature's gift is in effect. You have gained new abilities: heat resistance, tenacity and sprint. Heat resistance, you become extremely insensitive to high temperatures and possess extremely strong fire and heat resistance. Tenacity, you have a stronger physique than ordinary people, constitution +1, toughness +1. Sprint, you possess extremely strong sprinting abilities, especially in the chaotic streets of urban areas. You can burst out with twice the usual speed. Thank you, Mother Nature. Matthew placed one hand on his chest and saluted in the direction where he buried Heiss. The 3 new abilities obviously came from the arsonist. And they were all very practical. Heat resistance can reduce fire damage. Sprint made up for some of the mobility. And the constitution and toughness provided by tenacity were what Matthew dreamed of. Matthew remembered how Heiss managed to run hundreds of meters after being stabbed in the back that day. This arsonist clearly had more than one ability that could increase his toughness. Matthew was already content to get one. At present, it seems that nature's gift has no negative effects. From my senses, I've figured out that 1 oak tree corresponds to 1 burial. Matthew's mind started to work. Although he did not intend to turn the oak forest into a new cemetery, if he encountered a suitable corpse in the future, he would definitely not let it go. The only regrettable thing was, choosing nature's gift was equivalent to giving up the body of an undead creature. In a sense, Matthew sensed that this ability seemed to be trying to lead him to the right path, even though the method was somewhat strange. In the next few days, Matthew planted the trees diligently, and Ella followed suit. She looked at Matthew every day, hoping that he would change his mind. However, Matthew chose to ignore her. Even when she got too close, Soldier would suddenly jump out from a corner and stab her. This scared Ella so much that she flew all over the branches. Of course, Soldier had no intention of hurting her. He had only used Ella as a target to practice sneak attacks under Matthew's instructions. Every time he attacked, he would immediately activate the Dark Knight cloak and disappear. This made Ella feel worried, and she did not dare to approach the ground. However, no matter how Matthew threatened Ella, the owl did not leave. She tried her best to follow Matthew, trying to seize every opportunity to persuade him to join the Moonlight Society. Unfortunately, times have changed. Until the night 6 days later, Matthew finally found Ella and expressed his willingness to give her a chance, but only if Ella told the truth. Why did you leave the Moonlight Forest to find me? I want to hear the truth. Matthew examined Ella's eyes. The latter retracted her feathers and shrank back. This is the will of the goddess of moonlight. That day, I chased you away, but I was punished by the goddess like never before. She struck me with lightning 100 times and then drove me out of the Moonlight Forest. I have to bring you back. If I can't complete this mission within a month, my spirituality will be stripped away and I will be banished forever. I will become a muddle-headed beast. Please, Matthew, I really know my mistake. For the sake of the goddess, please join the Moonlight Society. Ella begged. Matthew was deep in thought. It's really related to the goddess of the moonlight. She actually paid attention to me. Wasn't it said that after the ascension of the Heavenly Family Palace, the connection between the heaven realm and the material realm had become very weak? He thought about it. In the end, he decided to return to Moonlight Woodland to take a look. He knew very little about the gods of this world, and the goddess of the moonlight did not seem to exist in the game in his previous life. Now that he had the opportunity to come into contact with her, he could not miss it. As for the owl, Ella. With Matthew's magnanimity, he naturally would not continue to bicker with her. However, the necessary punishment was still necessary. What? You want me to enlighten your oak forest once a month for a 3-year period? Ella exclaimed, do you know how much energy I have to initiate enlightenment? Matthew glanced at her and said calmly, it wouldn't kill you, right? Ella lowered her head. It seemed that she could no longer say a word. In the second half of the night, moonlight finally shone through the clouds. Under Ella's personal guidance, Matthew once again stepped onto the ground of the Moonlight Woodland. The moment he entered, 3 beams of moonlight flew up from the altar. It landed on Matthew. At that moment, it was as if he was bathing in a hot spring. All the pores on his body were relaxing. Hint, you have received the blessing of the goddess of moonlight, Moonwalker. Moonwalker, when you walk under the moonlight, your intelligence and intuition increase by 1 point. You have received the blessing of the goddess of moonlight, the Forest Guardian. Forest Guardian, you have a full amount of reputation and legendary points in the Moonlight Woodland. You will be able to go anywhere you want. You also have the ability to enter the Moonlight Woodland under the moonlight. You have successfully joined the Moonlight Society. Under the moonlight, your shapeshifting becomes a quick cast spell. All attributes of shapeshifting +1. Wow. Matthew was amazed. This series of blessings came so suddenly. Apart from joy, he also sensed a faint sense of danger. What does the goddess of moonlight need me to do? He knew very well that there was no free benefit in this world. Ella, on the other hand, looked overjoyed. Congratulations, Mr. Matthew, you have become the first and only necromancer in the Moonlight Society. Although you are not an official member yet, thanks to the grace of the goddess of moonlight, you can enter and leave the Moonlight Woodland as you wish. Most importantly, my mission is completed. I finally don't have to worry about being expelled by the goddess. As she laughed, she actually choked up. Matthew patiently waited for her to release her emotions. Then, he asked the same question again. Or should I ask the goddess myself? As he spoke, he was about to walk towards the altar. No need, no need. I'm your guide. Let me pass on the will of the goddess to you. Ella spread her wings and flew away. Follow me, Matthew. On the way, I'll introduce you to what you need to do to become an official member of the Moonlight Society. Ella's voice echoed in the forest for a long time. Matthew noticed that the emblem of the goddess of the moonlight on the altar was gradually dimming. He followed Ella all the way. They passed through most of the forest. Along the way, Matthew saw many nature souls. They all had the appearance of small animals. Unlike the nature spirits he encountered when he was traveling in the oak tree domain, the natives of the Moonlight Forest were clearly lifeless. They were spirits that symbolized vitality and nature. However, in Matthew's eyes, they were not as lively as a skeleton soldier. The natives looked at him in astonishment. At first, they were surprised and disgusted. However, perhaps they felt the grace of the goddess of the moonlight, and most of them stopped for a while. After a long time, they looked at Matthew with reverence. Their expressions and eyes were very stiff as if they were forced to admire Matthew. The situation in the Moonlight Woodland doesn't seem good. Matthew noticed a detail. Along the way, he did not encounter a single druid. After all, even if humans or elven druids were busy in the material plane, there was a chance that druids would be born among the natives of Nature's Soul. However, he did not see any of them. This was very unusual. He quickly followed the cheerful Ella and told her all his questions. Ella lowered her altitude slightly. You're very sharp. There aren't many druids in the Moonlight Woodland. It wasn't like this before. I still remember when I was young, and when I was just born, the nature souls in the forest were full of vitality. Every forest was inhabited by druids. They would take the initiative to repair the scars caused by the passage of time. But then a disaster happened, and the forest suffered a huge blow. Many druids died, and no new druids were born in nature's soul. Didn't you ask for help from the outside world? Matthew asked curiously. Yes, Ella said with a sigh. We've asked for help from the Guardian Highlands, the Arctic Tundra, and the Azure Sea, but they rejected us without exception. Only a few young druids who were traveling outside were willing to help us, but their power was not enough to change the situation, so this place became what you see now. As they continued to go deeper, Matthew noticed that the trees on both sides of the forest were dying. This meant that Moonlight Woodland was being attacked by evil forces. Why did the Guardian Watchers refuse to help? Matthew found it strange. Ella flew down. She stopped on a dead pine tree and looked around. Times have changed, Matthew. Humans are getting worse, and the druids are no exception. Although their reason for rejecting us is that they have also been attacked by evil and are unable to provide support. But I know the real reason. It's because we are moonwalkers, and they are the favored ones of the earth. Matthew didn't expect that the druids would refuse to help because of their different factions. From the information he had so far, the Moonlight Society was an organization under the command of the goddess of moonlight, Asiya. She might only have a very small amount of authority related to nature. Ever since the disaster that Ella mentioned, the druids who followed Moonlight had almost gone extinct. The remaining druids on this continent were all members of the Earth Society, which should be an organization founded by a god who controlled the power of the earth. There was no doubt that the divine power of the god of earth was much higher than that of the goddess of moonlight. The authority he held would also occupy more weight in the field of nature. This was what led to the current situation. To put it in layman's terms, the Moonlight Society might have been glorious once, but it had fallen. Matthew could basically understand why the goddess of moonlight had punished Ella and treated him so generously. The situation in the Moonlight Woodland was so bad that the Moonlight Goddess was desperate. Only Ella, this idiot, dared to chase away the people who might be able to help. She chased Matthew away. It was little surprise that she was punished. However, I would probably be rejected by the Earth Society. Matthew thought again. We're here. 15 minutes later, Ella stopped in front of a dark cave. She rushed forward and said, "Your job is to deal with those disgusting bugs here. If you can kill a mad Zerg, you will become an official member of the Moonlight Society, and the goddess will bestow more grace on you." At the same time, the mission panel was also updated. Submission: kill Zerg. Description: the Moonlight Forest is being invaded by the Zergs. Kill them all and then extort a sum from the goddess of moonlight. Reward: goddess of moonlight's grace and ability battle spellcasting. The ancient tiger. Here, this is for you. Ella flew in front of Matthew with a badge the size of a bottle cap in her mouth. Matthew reached out and took it. He realized that it was a disciple badge of the goddess of the moonlight. Can I use it too? Matthew asked in surprise. Ella's tone was somewhat embarrassed. The goddess is magnanimous. Matthew could hear the sadness in the other party's words. I've already given you the badge in advance, just believe in it. He looked down at the badge. In front of it was a bright moon that broke through the clouds. On the other side was a forest under the moonlight. There were also the outlines of many small animals in the forest. It was a very conventional badge design. Asiya's smile, divine spell badge plus 30% movement speed under the moonlight. Description: can cast moonlight 5 times per day. Even in a dark space, this badge can bring you moonlight. If the badge only provided the moonlight spell, it would undoubtedly be of little value. However, the buff of increasing movement speed was still very good. Now that Matthew had sprint, coupled with the effect of the divine badge, he wondered how fast he could run. Praise the moonlight. Matthew quickly put the badge on his chest and sang loudly from the bottom of his heart. Seeing this, Ella's originally low mood suddenly rose a lot. Thank you, Matthew. Well, there are a few things that I have to explain before entering the cave. Miss L said seriously. Firstly, as your guide, I will be by your side from the beginning to the end when you deal with the Zerg race. However, I hope that you can protect me, because I'm not good at fighting. I don't want to enter the cave at all. But the goddess won't allow it. Please, Matthew, don't let me die. Where were we? Oh, secondly, this underground cave is extremely complicated. Not only does it belong to the Moonlight Woodland, but it is also connected to the material plane and some other unknown planes. There may be extremely terrifying monsters hidden in the depths, especially below the 10th floor. Therefore, we must be careful when exploring. Although the Zerg mostly only appear in the first 10 floors, sometimes people will go too deep if they are not careful. I hope you are prepared. Thirdly, there are a few druids doing the same job as you in the cave. The goddess doesn't want any conflict between you. In order to avoid conflict, she gave you the divine badge in advance. This is what those druids look like. They are all very nice people, especially this Miss Samantha, who is also a moonwalker like you. As she spoke, a few magic portraits of druids appeared before Matthew's eyes. He glanced at them. His gaze lingered on the female druid for a while. I'll remember this. It's not up to me whether or not something unpleasant will happen. Matthew chuckled and glanced at Ella. The latter lowered her head in shame. Then, she said solemnly, I'll vouch for you. These druids like me very much. With me around, they won't find trouble with you. So you must protect me well. Matthew replied indifferently. I'll try my best. Ella still looked a little nervous. She carefully stepped on Matthew's shoulder and asked, Then, shall we enter the hole? Matthew shook his head. I'm afraid I can't go in like this. I have to go home first. Ella immediately became anxious. Don't tell me you want to. Matthew said frankly. As you can see, I am a necromancer. No, absolutely not. I can't let the undead creatures taint the moonlight woodland. Even if they took one more step in the forest, it would be blasphemy to nature and the goddess. Ella was jumping on Matthew's shoulder emotionally. Matthew had expected this. After she calmed down, he then asked calmly. If I don't have my summons, are you going to fight for me? Ella fell silent. In short, no. No, Matthew. Oh, fine, hiss, I hate you, Matthew. I'm in. Half an hour later. In the dark underground cave. A row of skeleton soldiers was exploring the dark area in front of them in an orderly manner. Matthew walked in the middle. Ella was sitting on his shoulder with a resentful look on her face. The visibility in the cave was very poor. Fortunately, Matthew had prepared torches in advance. The two skeleton soldiers in front and behind each raised one, illuminating the surrounding environment. The terrain here was somewhat similar to the underground karst caves. They were both tunnels that extended in all directions. The only difference was, the climate here was even more humid, as if the entire cave had been soaked in water for a long time. Matthew walked among them. The sound of dripping water and footsteps continued. However, most of the underground plants here were in a state of decay and withering. It was as if a force had taken away their vitality. Is this the Zerg? In the corner ahead, a skeleton soldier was using his forearm to dig out a purple conch-shaped meat shell mechanically. The meat shell was filled with yellow-green mucus and pus. He could still vaguely see the severed limbs of insect-like creatures. This is a destroyed hive. Do you see the mark on the wall over there? Ella tried her best to suppress her disgust. That is the crescent moon mark. There was a tick above the mark, which meant that all the Zergs in the vicinity had been cleared, including the hive. Matthew nodded. He had seen the mark long ago. It was obviously left behind by other druids. We have to pay more attention to this kind of mark. Ella entered the state of a guide. If there is an exclamation mark on the crescent moon, it means that there are many bugs nearby. There might even be wild Zerg guards. They are terrifying monsters. They are the elites of the Zerg race. The two of them continued forward. They left very smoothly. Apart from withered underground plants, destroyed hives, and a few traces of burning, they did not encounter anything new along the way. Very quickly, a Y-shaped intersection appeared in front of them. The terrain on both sides of the road sunk. Hint, you have found the entrance to the second level of the Zerg nest. Both caves led to the second level. But Matthew was not in a hurry to move. He could hear footsteps and conversation coming from the cave on the left. It's too narrow here, Samantha. My wilderness form is restricted, and we have to be on guard against being infected at all times. I have to admit that this is indeed one of the more difficult challenges I've received. It was a deep male voice. His voice was extremely magnetic and carried a faint majesty. So you understand how I felt before, right? You are the ancient tiger, Eli. If you find it troublesome, imagine how I must feel. The female voice chuckled and said, however, your transformation just now was indeed very cool. It's a pity that the Zerg guard ran away. Haha, do you think so too? Who's there? The male voice's smugness stopped abruptly. Not long after, a man and a woman walked out of the cave on the left. They were dressed in simple linen clothes. The man was tall and had an open chest, revealing well-proportioned and developed muscles and thick chest hair. The woman was tall and had a hot figure. Her eyes were very long and her face had a wild beauty. Hello, Samantha. The moment the two sides met, Ella greeted them. Did you just come up from below? How's the situation down there? My underlings and I are going down to take a look. Samantha did not say anything. She just stared at Matthew. However, the tall man beside him said indifferently. Samantha is the Moonlight Society's sole support, so the situation down there is a mess. The number of Zerg guards is increasing, and they are also very good at escaping. I just severely injured one, but unfortunately, it escaped. Ella looked at him in surprise. Are you the ancient tiger of the Earth Society? The legendary Eli? Eli smiled warmly. I'm only a third-rank shapeshifter. I'm not worthy of the title of ancient tiger. You should wait until I complete my final hunting mission and demolish that evil dragon in the ice river. Will I be fit to use the title? Then, he turned to Matthew like Samantha. A necromancer? Samantha asked. Matthew nodded. It's not what you think. Ella said hurriedly. Samantha, Matthew is a good man. He's here to help us. You have to believe me, I will never compromise with evil. Matthew felt sad and amused when he saw her like that. He simply opened his mouth to help explain, not every necromancer is evil. On the contrary, I came here to get rid of the evil in this place. Truly an eye-opener. Eli sneered, his gaze sweeping over the skeleton soldiers. He seemed to want to do something, but Samantha stopped him. Let's go. Ella urged Matthew into the cave. Matthew shrugged and ordered a few skeleton soldiers to scout ahead before he followed. He watched as the group of figures disappeared into the cave. Eli frowned and said, You should have let me take action. At least, you should have destroyed those skeleton soldiers. How could we allow those undead creatures to taint the nature-sacred land? Samantha shook her head. Leave it be. The situation in the Moonlight Woodland Forest is indeed terrible. Is that why they're colluding with the necromancers? Samantha looked a little pained. You're right, Eli. I'll consider your previous proposal. Eli's eyes lit up. You want to leave the Moonlight Society? This is great. With your strength and potential, our Earth Society has always reserved a seat for you. When are you coming with me to see the Great Elder? Samantha said seriously, Calm down, Eli. I once swore under the moon that I must help the forest eradicate the Zerg race. Even if I wanted to leave the Moonlight Society, this oath would not change. If I could not do this, I would never leave. Eli was stunned. Then, he revealed a satisfied expression. Very good, such is the will of a woman I like. The Earth God will protect you, Samantha. When I go back and make my preparations, we will join forces and kill Queen Zerg. It's a pity that the situation at the Highlands isn't looking good either. Otherwise, I could have applied to the church to mobilize the sacred object. As you know, the scar of the dead is getting worse. Like and subscribe.